You might remember a recent video I did about PayPal apologising for any confusion caused about a purported fine for people disseminating misinformation. But as it turns out, there's been a similar term in their user policy for quite some time now. So I'm going to alert you to that in this video. So welcome back, but if you're new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you understand law. So let's talk about this acceptable use policy. In my last video, which I stand by, acceptable use policy is unacceptable. Now, an interesting thing I've come across in the reading for this video is that there is a slightly different version of terms, as one might expect, for the US and the UK. But the difference is fairly interesting. Now, the US version of this policy states that you are independently responsible for complying with all applicable laws in all of your actions related to your use of PayPal's services. Understandable. Regardless of the purpose of the use, it goes on. In addition, you must adhere to the terms of this acceptable use policy. Violation of this acceptable use policy constitutes a violation of PayPal user agreement and may subject you to damages, including liquidated damages of $2,500 per violation. So this could add up quite quickly, which, and here's the killer point, may be debited directly from your PayPal accounts, plural, as outlined in the user agreement. See Restricted Activities and Holds section of the PayPal user agreement. Now, pausing there for a moment, just to summarize, if they deem any violation on your part, they will debit $2,500 per violation immediately from any account you hold. But let's look at the UK version, because obviously I can only really speak to the law of England and Wales, and I can comment upon the law internationally, but predominantly I will comment on the law of England and Wales, which provides that if a term is unreasonable or unfair, then it's unenforceable. And terms are usually unfair and unenforceable if they have a significant disproportionate effect on the individual consumer or user than they do on the other party. So if it's unfair, as a general rule, it's unenforceable. And if it's a fine, it's generally unfair and generally unenforceable. So if anything is seen to be a fine, it's generally unenforceable, which I find a little bit strange given the reading of these rules. Let's look at the UK version of this acceptable use policy, which you'll note in the opening paragraph has a distinct difference from the US version. It provides, in terms of the UK, you are independently responsible for complying with all applicable laws in all your actions related to your use of PayPal's services. Looks the same so far, regardless of the purpose of use. In addition, you must adhere to the terms of the acceptable use policy. Violation of this acceptable use policy constitutes a violation of your PayPal user agreement. See Restricted Activities, Holds and Liquidated Damages section of the PayPal user agreement. You will note that in this opening section for the UK, it omits an amount per violation, whereas in the US version it specifies $2,500. In the UK version, it omits that, save for when you look at the Restricted Activities and Holds Liquidated Damages section, which is very subtly different again to the US version, although in this section it does have a section that refers to $2,500. If you use your PayPal account primarily for the purposes of your trade, business, craft or profession and you violate the acceptable use policy, then in addition to being subject to the above actions, which is limiting the account and things like that, you'll be liable to PayPal for the amount of PayPal's damages caused by your violation of the acceptable use policy. You acknowledge and agree that $2,500, or the prevailing equivalent in the currency of the country in which you reside, UK being GBP, per violation of the acceptable use policy is a reasonable minimum estimate, reasonable and proportionate, and necessary but no more than sufficient. And then PayPal may deduct such damages directly from any existing balance in any PayPal account you control. So that's not just the one account in particular, but any account that you control. Now, what's really interesting is if we go back to the top of all of these documents, it provides that this PayPal user agreement has been in effect since the 9th of August 2022, But if we also go back to the acceptable use policy for the UK, that is, it's been in place or last updated since the 28th of March 2022. Going back to the US version, which does specify the $2,500 per violation, this has been in place since September the 21st, 2021. So whilst PayPal may have openly apologised for any confusion caused, in that it is not fining people for misinformation and the language was never intended to be inserted into the user policy, it turns out that a very broad term in respect of liquidated damages that can be deducted from an account per violation that they deem fit of $2,500 or the currency equivalent thereof has been in place for quite some time. However, when we compare this public apology for causing confusion with the restricted activities in the PayPal user agreement, it does include something which is very broadly similar. It says under this section, under restricted activities for which it might consider a violation and debit your account with $2,500 per violation, it says in connection with your use of our websites, your PayPal account, the PayPal services, or in the course of your interactions with PayPal, other PayPal customers or third parties, you must not, and then there's a long list which I will link in the description below, breach the user agreement, the acceptable use policy, and so on and so forth, violate any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, and so on, fair enough, infringe PayPal or any third party's copyright, and so on, and fair enough, sell counterfeit goods, act in a manner that is defamatory, trade libelous, threatening, or harassing, provide false, inaccurate, or misleading information, send or receive what we reasonably believe to be potentially fraudulent or unauthorized funds, refuse to cooperate in an investigation, conduct your business or the use of PayPal services in a manner that results in or may result in complaints or request by buyers to invalidate payments made to you, and a whole list of other things which PayPal deems to be a restricted activity, all of which it includes within this PayPal user agreement. So as I said previously, my view is that this might well amount to an unfair term, which might render it unenforceable, in the UK at least. But I thought it very interesting that PayPal would publicly apologise for causing confusion for a term that appears to have been in their acceptable use policy and their user terms for a very long time. So as I said, I will link all of these policies in the description below. None of what I say can be taken as legal advice. You can read them yourself and make your own opinions and your own judgments as to what these terms mean for you. If you remain unclear, I would suggest you take formal legal advice, particularly if you have a large amount of money in your PayPal account and you're trying to decide whether or not to leave that money in your PayPal account or seek out other services. I would urge you to seek formal legal advice with respect to all of these terms, because I for one would be particularly concerned if I was relying on PayPal and there were such terms here that they can just debit that amount from your account for something that it appears to have the sole discretion. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I would really appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe. The subscribe button has changed, by the way, on mobile at least. It's no longer red. It's either black or white, depending on your device preferences on the screen layout. So please do look for that button and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.